Roughly 65,000 years ago, a group of humans did something that on paper should have been impossible. They crossed open ocean out of sight of land for days and reached Australia. No compass, no sail that we found evidence of, no wheel. The wheel hadn't been invented yet. Horses hadn't been ridden yet. And yet humans were already braver and better at travel than almost anything that came after. So here's the question that should be bothering you. If they could do that 65,000 years ago, why did it take another 60,000 years to figure out you could sit on a horse? If you had to guess the order in which humans figured out how to get around, what would you guess? Probably something like walking, then riding animals, then boats, then everything else. That feels logical. It's also almost completely backwards. And once you see the real order, you start to understand something strange about how human progress actually works. It doesn't move in a straight line. It moves toward whatever problem is in front of you, regardless of how advanced the solution looks from the outside. Let's start with walking, because that part actually does come first, and it's more remarkable than it sounds. Around 1.8 million years ago, a species called Homo erectus left Africa and spread across Asia, reaching as far as modern-day Indonesia. On foot, no animal, no boat, just legs, endurance, and an ability to plan ahead that no other animal on the planet had. Walking sounds basic, but walking with intention, walking toward a place you've never seen based on a plan, is one of the rarest behaviors in nature. A wolf doesn't migrate to a new continent because it heard the hunting might be better there. Humans did exactly that repeatedly for over 1 million years before anything else got involved. Then something happened that completely breaks the logical order assumption. Around 65,000 years ago, modern humans reached Australia. And Australia, even during the Ice Age when sea levels were much lower than today, was still separated from the Asian mainland by open water. Not a narrow channel you could wade across. Real ocean, in places over 50 miles wide, with currents and no visible land on the other side. Archaeologists have found human remains and tools in Australia dating back to roughly this period, which means someone, or more likely groups of someone, repeatedly built something that could float, loaded it with people, and pushed off into open water toward a horizon with nothing on it. We don't know exactly what these vessels looked like because wood and reed don't survive 65,000 years, but we know they existed because the only other explanation is that humans somehow swam to Australia, which nobody seriously proposes. The most likely candidates are simple rafts or dugout-style vessels made from logs lashed together, or large bundles of reeds and bamboo, which are naturally buoyant and were used by coastal peoples in this region well into recent history. Whatever it was, it worked. Multiple times, with enough people and enough genetic diversity to found a population that would go on to inhabit an entire continent. Think about that. The wheel, something we treat as the foundational human invention, the thing cartoons use as shorthand for ancient technology, wouldn't be invented for another 60,000 years, and humans had already crossed an ocean. So why boats before wheels? The answer has to do with what problems are actually in front of you. If you live near a coastline, near a river, near any large body of water, that water is both an obstacle and an opportunity. It blocks you from walking further. But it also happens to be one of the easiest surfaces on Earth to move heavy things across, if you can just stay on top of it. A log floats whether you do anything to it or not. You don't need to invent floating. You just need to notice it and then figure out how to control it. A wheel, by contrast, is useless without a relatively flat, hard surface to roll on, something most of the ancient world simply didn't have. Forests, grasslands, mountains, and riverbanks don't offer much for wheels. They offer plenty for boats. Now let's talk about animals, because this is where the timeline gets genuinely surprising. The first animal humans formed a deep travel partnership with wasn't the horse. It was the dog. Dogs were domesticated somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago. The exact date is still debated, but either way, it's tens of thousands of years before anyone rode a horse. And in certain environments, particularly the Arctic, dogs weren't just companions. They were the engine. Sled dogs pulling loads across snow and ice predate horse-drawn vehicles by an enormous margin. In a landscape where wheels are useless, snow doesn't support them, and ice is the opposite of a road, a team of dogs pulling a sledge was, for thousands of years, the fastest way to move people and goods across the northern world. The technology is almost insultingly simple. Animals with four-wheel drive paws, a flat sledge, and rope. But it solved a transportation problem that nothing else available at the time could touch. Meanwhile, in the Andes Mountains of South America, a completely different solution emerged for a completely different problem. Llamas and alpacas were domesticated roughly 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, and they became essential for moving goods across some of the most brutal terrain on Earth. Steep, rocky, high-altitude mountain paths, where wheels would be not just useless, but actively dangerous. Here's the part that surprises people. Llamas were used to carry loads. They were almost never ridden. They're simply too small to comfortably carry an adult human for any distance. So an entire civilization built a transportation network around an animal that carried your stuff while you walked next to it. The Inca road system eventually stretched over 25,000 miles, through mountains, with no wheels, no horses, and no one ever sitting down. And for a moment, sit with that, because there's something quietly humbling about it. We tend to imagine ancient transportation as one single story. Humans figured out how to ride animals, and then everything got faster. But that's not what happened anywhere, really. Every region solved its own specific problem with whatever was actually available. The Arctic had snow and dogs, the Andes had mountains and llamas, the Pacific had open water and an intuitive understanding of currents that took outsiders thousands of years to even recognize as a system. None of these solutions were behind. They were just answers to different questions. Which brings us finally to horses, the animal most people assume came first. Horses were domesticated around 3,500 BC in the grasslands of what's now Kazakhstan by a culture archaeologists call the Botai. And once humans figured out how to ride a horse, the effect on long-distance travel was genuinely explosive. A person on foot might cover 20 miles in a hard day. A person on a horse could cover that same distance in 2 or 3 hours and keep going. Suddenly, regions that had been separated by weeks of travel were separated by days. Trade networks expanded. Information moved faster. Empires that previously couldn't have coordinated across their own territory suddenly could. But here's the thing that gets lost in the story of horses. By the time the Botai were climbing onto horseback for the first time, Polynesian-style ocean navigation, using stars, ocean swells, wind patterns, and the flight paths of birds to find islands thousands of miles apart with zero instruments, was either already happening or would begin not long after, using techniques that, in some form, traced back to those original 65,000-year-old ocean crossings. The advanced solution and the ancient solution were, in some places, running in parallel, or even in the wrong order, depending on where you happen to be standing. So when you look at a map of the world, every continent, every island, every place humans live, every single one of those places was reached on foot, by boat, or with the help of an animal, by someone who had no engine, no modern map, and often no idea what was on the other side. Walking got us out of Africa and across most of Asia. Boats, built from logs and reeds with no metal tools, got us across open ocean to Australia tens of thousands of years before the wheel existed. Dogs got us across the Arctic. Llamas got goods across the Andes. And horses, the animal most people assume started it all, were actually one of the last major pieces to fall into place. The wheel, when it finally arrived around 3,500 BC, wasn't really a transportation breakthrough on its own. It was a breakthrough for the specific places that had flat ground and not much water, which, it turns out, is a smaller slice of the ancient world than we tend to assume. Every method humans used to travel was a direct answer to the ground, the water, the climate, and the animals that happened to exist in that specific place. Nothing was universal. Nothing arrived in the correct order because there was no correct order. Only the order that matched what was actually around you. The people who crossed to Australia in something made of logs and reeds weren't behind the people who would later ride horses across the steppe. They were ahead by 60,000 years, solving a completely different problem with the only thing they had. That's the part that's easy to miss. We tend to rank ancient technologies like a ladder, walking at the bottom, wheels and horses near the top, as if everyone was climbing toward the same destination. But the people in that boat 65,000 years ago weren't on a lower rung of the same ladder the Botai were on 60,000 years later. They were standing in front of a completely different problem, and they solved it. Just like we are right now with the problems standing in front of us. Here's a question. Out of walking, boats, dogs, llamas, and horses, if you had to cross an unfamiliar landscape with zero modern tools, which one would you actually trust your life to? Drop your answer below. I'll read through the best ones. See you in next one.